don't know about you, but I like to have my knits not have holes in them. Unfortunately, that's not always my reality. I live in the Midwest of the United States, which is a 4 seasons climate, half the time being winter, and yet that seems to be when moths are the most prevalent. I know there's lots of pests that can get into knits, anything that is knitted, crocheted, whatever, made with yarn, animal fibers, plant fibers, etc. But here, there are these little white moths. So recently, I decided to go through all of my knits to see how they are doing. I was tired of pulling out sweaters or other things that I wanted to wear and finding them with holes in them. So I went through everything. I went through sweaters, shawls, cowls, socks, and I sorted them into piles. Which ones had holes, which ones didn't, which ones were salvageable, and which ones weren't. Of course, I based some of my criteria on how much I loved the knit and how damaged it was versus how much I loved it in a way, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So initially, as I said, I made piles of stuff that I was like, absolutely not, just cannot salvage. Some that possibly I could have salvaged, and some that for sure I can salvage / didn't have holes. I mean, I think that's actually 4 piles. Once I separated them, I started planning how to repair them. What I mean by that is some of my knits I do have leftover yarn for, and I can fix using that leftover yarn, and some I don't, and so I have to decide how to go about it. So let's go ahead and just start talking about what I have. So one of the first knits I discovered holes in was my study hall shawl. I knit this in summer of 2023. Summer of 2023. This is the first thing I made / finished. Yeah, made. I don't think I started it before. After I gave birth. And this is like a super important milestone for me. I had really severe postpartum depression, and having something to sort of get me back into knitting again was very important. So I started this like 2 or 3 months postpartum, and I just have memories of just sitting at the park in my car. There's one specific day in my memory that I remember sitting in my car. It was lightly raining and I was crying, and there was this rainbow, and I don't know, it just was, there's actually a lot of rainbows that summer, and this is just one of those like warm memories. So when I found that this had some holes in it, I was not extremely pleased, but they were small and fixable. So what I did for this was, I don't have any of the yarn left, at least not that I'm aware of, from this project. I probably got rid of it. And the silver here is a single, and so I don't know if that really means anything, but it's, you know, fuzzier and whatnot. But I just went through and very methodically just identified where each of the holes were, and went to work sort of just basically duplicate stitching over. So on the back here, you can see there are a couple tied-in spots. I just took a white yarn, it looks like, and went over it. And I mean, it's not perfect. I didn't use a blue. It's not a big deal. I just fixed up, for example, this hole. Most of them actually were not that intense. I want to say there were 3 or 4 small holes on this shawl. And I'll insert any footage of the holes, where they were, and then what it looked like when I finished them, if I took footage of it. What's really funny is I already am like, I love that even though I know that my mending job is not perfect, I like can't find the spots where the holes were. And I think that that's something really important to remember, is if you get knits that have holes in them, whether from pests or because I got snagged on something or whatever, unless it's in a terrible spot, which I'll get to with a couple of my knits, it's not going to be that big of a deal, even if it's like very noticeable when you really get up close, or otherwise are like judging it. Like I wouldn't be able to enter this in a state fair, but and I mean I have a couple of errors on this anyway, but like see, I have a couple of like pulled stitches that aren't ripped that I'm pushing to the back. But yeah, I cannot find where all the errors are. If you look at the shawl, if I were to put it on, can't even tell there were holes. Oh my God, I love this shawl. Now, it's important to note, you know, if you're gentle with your knits, a lot of times, if the yarn's not super slippery, you can wear it with holes in it. I mean, really, a lot of times they might, you know, the fibers will catch on themselves. And what's really nice about non-slippery yarn, like I'm thinking silk and other yarns like that, the fibers will eventually catch on each other and then probably not undo as long as you're not tugging on it. It's a lot easier to do with something like a shawl than with a sweater, but it is possible. And several of these I did wear with holes in them a few times just because I wanted to, but I ultimately wanted to repair them so that it didn't get worse. But yeah, the first thing I found that had holes in it that I wanted to fix was my study hall shawl, and I did fix it. The next thing that I fixed, I was furious that it had holes in it because I'd already reknit a good portion of the product, the project, because it had been eaten by moths previously. And that is my Luna Rising sweater by Tina Say. Part of this is I reknit the bottom because there was like, this was the very first like actual full-size sweater I ever knit, and so there was a lot of sizing problems when I first knit it. And also the pattern, if you do the cables all the way down, I think it is, there's something about it, and it ends up extremely fabric heavy and boxy in a non-flattering way. So I just reknit it, just plain. If you're interested in everything I did to modify this sweater, I do have a video for it that you can go watch. But anyway, when I went to wear the sweater one time, there were significant holes around here, like right in the center of the body. And then there were also some holes in the sleeves. And so what I ended up actually doing was ripping back all the way up to right a little bit before the color change. And I ended up basically just reknitting that whole thing. There were a lot of holes. I mean, I can still see a little bit of sensitive, slightly sensitive areas, but moths must really love whatever these yarns are. And so I did end up reknitting the whole thing because that was worth it for me. And I had already been planning on ripping the body back at some point anyway. So that worked out, and it worked out because this is Simplicity Spray by Haiku. So, and I had a full whole extra skein of this, and then I did have leftovers of this contrast color yarn. I also had some leftovers of this small contrast color yarn as well. So I think the new holes ended up mostly on the sleeves. Again, I have footage of repairing it, but I just went through, found the holes, and basically duplicate stitched over them. And this sweater really means a lot to me. I love this sweater. I wear it all the time, and so it's worth it to me to go back, and I'm so glad that I have leftovers for it. And so that is a good reason to keep leftovers if you have pests like I do. So, I mean, you can see that barely you can tell that this is just not straight stockinette. I went in the back and I just sort of went over and cinched them back together. This was a small hole, and then there were, I think, a couple others as well. So I went and tidied that up. Happy that I have my sweater back the way it is, and gotta keep those safe from the freaking moths. Another one that I decided to save is the Autumn Mist shawl. So this one I did not have any of the leftovers for. This was with a skein of mohair alternating with minis, so I used basically all of the minis. It had just a couple spots, and I just visibly mended it. So I just went through and followed the spots there. What's interesting is that sometimes when you go over spots, it ends up not being that big of a deal. And sometimes when you start going through, you realize that more like levels, more rows have been eaten into than initially it looked. And again, that's because the fibers are like, they're trying to hold their structure. They want to stay hugging their little buddies, right? So I think this one did have a couple of those, but it ended up being more involved than I had anticipated. So I used, what's really funny is it's actually showing up way brighter on camera. It's not nearly as noticeable. I mean, the blah is noticeable, but the color is not as intensely different in real life. But this is what I ended up doing for this row. And again, you know, this felt worth saving. It's a really, really cute shawl. I do like wearing it sort of as more of a, not necessarily like this, but more as a, like, you know, one of this style. And so again, wearing it, you know, it's bunched up. Let's see, some of the mending. Just seeing if any of it's visible from here. Nope. Yeah, so see, like on this part, it's really, there's nothing visible. And then when you're wearing it, you know, it's all curled and whatnot. So just made sure that those holes were taken care of, and it continues to have life. I think possibly the first thing that I fixed was this turtle dove. This turtle dove sweater is one of my most loved pieces. I wear it often, and there were just a couple small holes in it, and so I repaired those quickly. I actually did order a skein of yarn from Knit Picks. This is Knit Picks Wonder Fluff, and so I did order a new skein because it doesn't really matter if the color lots are a little bit different, because it's small patching and it's a very fuzzy, bulky sweater, and it just all will blend together. So I did fix the holes on that pretty easily, no big deal there, which I'm really glad about because I love this sweater. Another one I decided to save was my Initium shawl. This is by Carolyn Dick. I did this specifically because Steve requested that I do it. He wanted to keep it. I was sort of on the fence about keeping it. Don't get me wrong, these are TMNT colors and I love them, and this is a fun pattern, but I just don't feel like any of these colors, honestly, are like my colors. I just don't feel like I look very good wearing it. So this is a shawl for Steve at this point. I also didn't do very good on the yarn overs. I think if I made this really early on in my experienced knitting career, and I feel like I would do German short rows. And by that, I don't know why I said yarn overs when I meant short rows. The short row shaping came out a little weird. Oh, I think I might have tried German short rows and like it didn't work out in the way that Carolyn wanted you to construct it. Here is like the main part that I fixed. It was ended up being several rows. I used the same teal that I used on my, I used the same teal that was on my Luna Rising for this. And again, in real life, you can't really see the color difference. It's just like if you hold it up, you can see that it's thicker, but there were a couple of those spots on here, but that one was the biggest one. So yeah, this one looked like it was sort of a big chunk and then a 1 or 2 stitches over on the side. And so I just sort of traveled the yarn all the way down. And again, if you're wearing it, now that the holes are fixed, can't tell, have no idea that there even had been holes, which makes me really happy. It's about saving and not perfection. And yet there actually are some spots where perfection or very specific kind of mending is needed, but I'll talk about those in a second. The last two that ended up saving out of however many I ended up actually going through include my Sunspotter shawl. This was one of the very first colorwork shawls I ever did. If not, I don't think it's the first, I think it might be the second or something. I love this. I made this in like 2018 or 2019. Love, love, love. This one had a couple holes in it as well. And again, like this one, for example, just needed this part just needed a little bit of cinching together. I didn't even use anywhere close to this color blue. I just used a dark blue, but on this side, it's really only one stitch that's visible. And I think that's actually it for the actual mending. I mean, in reality, it was several stitches that needed to be gone over and re-cinched back together. But again, if you decide you're gonna wear it, wow, so beautiful. I have no idea that there was a hole, but I remember wearing this after I discovered the hole, and I felt like it was noticeable, and it's just something I was constantly thinking about, right? Like, oh, there's a hole on it. It kind of looks sloppy, I feel like, and in reality, I don't think people probably notice, but I notice, and I want it to be fixed. And I also don't like the anxiety of, am I making it worse? And lastly, I repaired this turtle dove. Again, Knit Picks Wonder Fluff. It did have a few different spots of being eaten. A couple that I noticed after I started. Again, it's like, you know, once you find one hole, you find a couple other holes, etc. But it actually gave me a great opportunity to fix the sleeves. So I knit this without at all measuring for the arms. My arms didn't consider blocking, none of that stuff. And so when I finished it, the sleeves actually ended up being like, I swear, like almost 10 inches too long, something crazy like that. I mean, they did like fold up in a comfy way on themselves, but it was still just way too much fabric. So I did rip out both sleeves. I ripped both of them, not all the way, but I ripped both of them back. And then I was able to then use the rest of that yarn to re-knit the sleeves, get the sleeve cuffs, which were damaged, re-knit, and then the ends woven in, of course. And then there was a couple spots. I want to say there was a spot on one of the raglans. I can't remember if it was on this one or the other one, but there were a couple spots that needed to be fixed. And again, super easy fix because it's bulky, fuzzy yarn. Everything just blends in, and I'm really happy because I did not knit this that long ago. But yeah, I think most of the holes were on the sleeve slash literally right here on the cuffs in a couple spots. So that was a great opportunity. It just took a little bit of time because I had to undo both of them and get the yarn wound up and whatnot. I don't remember if I kept track of what I ended up throwing out, just straight throwing out. The reason why I threw out some knits just straight up is because if you've ever had moths, or honestly any pests, I'm sure, they leave stuff. They leave residue. In the case of moths, it's like sand granules almost. And also, of course, I don't know, they just goop up the fabric when they eat it, whatever their mouths are doing, and just kind of make them gross. And so some of them just were simply so disgusting. They weren't worth even attempting to keep or wear. And some of them were so eaten, they literally fell apart in my hands. And I've never seen that before. And I've been knitting since 2007. It was freaking wild. They just had a heyday. But there are 3 things that I have here that I am saving for a friend to try to salvage on their own. The first one is this basic raglan by Hohilo Catelli. I love this sweater. Unfortunately, the moth-eaten holes location is in places that I cannot salvage. So there's a significant hole right in the center here. And I don't have any of this yarn left. I used I remember I had yarn chicken binding this off. I used every single bit of this yarn, and I know, like from here, of course, you're like, oh, there's not, everything blends in. I can promise you that the stitches are actually very well defined in person, and there's just no way with the way that this hole is to fix it that it wouldn't bother me so much. Like I cannot handle right in this area, right? If you are a crafter of garments, I feel like you probably have the same feeling that in the yoke area, you just can't have any glaring errors. And I feel like trying to fix these stitches, you know, it's not going to be perfect, and it would bother me every time. It feels really similar to getting like a grease stain, or just honestly any stain on a regular shirt, and you just know it's there every time and you can like feel it. And so this is just not worth it. And so unfortunately I'm going to say goodbye to this, but otherwise it's a very perfectly good sweater. Like there's nothing else that's the matter with it. There might be another hole or two smaller ones that I may have missed, but yeah, this hole, unfortunately. So my friend is going to either do some visible mending, or I don't know, maybe a patch or something, and is planning possibly to regift, or otherwise just have as a practice project. Two of them that are absolutely got to be practice projects have to be these next ones. This one is heartbreaking because it is my rainbow by Yelly Knits in this gorgeous, gorgeous yarn that I saved for the most perfect project, and it was the most perfect project. It's a beautiful, beautiful sweater, but you might be able to see, look at this, the whole front, the entire front is eaten up. So this could be a fun project for my friend to practice on. There's also a huge hole directly in the raglan shaping on the front. Like they just had friggin' smorgasbord on this poor, poor, poor sweater. So here's another one, another hole. I mean, they just ate this up, and I cannot save it. Again, I'm not going to just straight trash it, but I will let my friend try to salvage it for herself. But again, this is like, can you imagine a visible mending? This is the front. Like, can't do it. Can't be possible. So there's also a hole in the back here. Yep. So unfortunately I am saying goodbye to this, but I am glad I don't have to straight trash it at this time. And somehow even worse than that, but still a good project to try to visibly mend, is my Colorful Keepsake by Tina Say. So this was a mystery knit along that I did a long time ago. It took 3 full skeins of yarn and was a really fun knit, but again, like, hey guys, hello. So there's those holes. Here's another one. Oh, and another one. I think that's all, but those are the holes, and they are big. So again, to me, it did not seem worth it to try to repair. Just overwhelming, way too big. I just don't want to deal with it. I got a lot of joy out of this, but at this point, not worth my time, but a great visible mending and or patching up project. So otherwise, good. None of the 3 of these are, like, I can feel the little sands. They're impossible. I'm gonna wash them before I give them to my friend, but they are not dirty, but some of them were horrible. And that's just sad. And I do have actually one more that is still a work in progress. And that ended up being my backlit tee by Telly B Knits. So this one I actually got pretty lucky, all things considered. Not as lucky as I had initially thought, but pretty lucky. So the bottom of this was absolutely destroyed. Like the entire ribbing was just chomped through. So what I did was I found what basically seemed like the last row that they had eaten, which ended up actually being the last row of color work. There were a couple of stitches that were ruined, but for the most part, it actually just ended up being the black ribbing part. And so I literally took scissors and I just cut off the ribbing. And then I picked up all the stitches in the last row of color work. And that's how I discovered that there were a couple that were eaten, but I was like, I'll fix it later. And then I bought more yarn because this is actually Cascade Heritage, and so it's easy to acquire. And I started just re-knitting over it. And then when I got to some of the holes, I would try to repair them. So some of the remaining holes, because again, most of them I physically cut off with scissors. I just cut it all off. But yeah, so in the case of the couple of stitches that were expired in the color work, I actually do have some of the leftover yarn from this bright skein, because the skein I got, I think it was from 716 Knit. It was a big, long striping yarn. And so when I knit this, I knit the whole thing, just letting the colors change on their own, I believe. And then when I got to the, what is this called? What's the nice way of saying this? Not lice stitch, or is it just lice stitch? I did just sort of change the colors when I wanted to, and then let it be natural again for the last part. And so I had a little bit left, and I had a couple other smaller ones I ended up getting rid of, like smaller skeins from where I had hurried up the color change. But so I did have some of that left, and that was good. So I think I just repaired just a teeny bit, but I did discover, this is unfortunate, but there was a hole, again, sort of like dead center in this color work. But as you can see from afar, the only way you can really tell is that the gradient is slightly off. And when you get closer, you're like, oh, that looks messy. But from afar, or like when you're just existing, it looks like nothing really. So this ended up being about 9 stitches that were affected. Not all of them were completely broken. But when you think of like the grid, I think it was like 9. It could have been maybe up to 12 overall affected. And so I just went over, I just took some of the yellow and I just cinched it up a bunch of times. So like, because some of the black were affected, both the colors in the center were completely gone and whatnot. But I am okay with this, specifically because of the nature of the color work and how busy it is in general. So it blends in as a whole. Like it's gonna get lost among everything. And so am I disappointed that there is one? And why is it always right where you can see it? Why didn't they eat the back? Why? Can I wear it from the back? Yes, but it does have short rows, and so the short row makes it longer in the back and short, you know, so it is more forward in the front, so it would be a lot higher on my neck otherwise. But so this is the front, and now I'm just working on adding the ribbing. This is in fingering weight yarn, and these are size 5 3.75 millimeter needles, so this will just take a while, but I am very grateful that it didn't appear anywhere else was eaten. And actually, now that I'm talking to you, I knew it. Okay, there actually is another small hole right here. It's funny because when I was starting the repair, I was like, I thought there was a hole somewhere in one of the sleeves, but I couldn't find it. And then I guessed at myself and thought I made it up. So there looks like there's 1 or 2 black stitches that have been eaten right here. So I am going to go ahead and repair that as well. But this one, thankfully, is actually salvageable. So I have to deal with that. The question of the day then is, how do you prevent pests from eating your knits? Historically, I think cedar chests were used. Maybe some people still have those. In my experience, cedar, lavender, any of that stuff does not work. The problem with mothballs is they smell really bad and they off-gas dangerous materials. Like if you're like, oh, I don't keep candles in my house anymore because you're breathing in all the fumes. Well, mothballs are carcinogenic, unfortunately. And, you know, so is a gas stove. I mean, all of those things are carcinogenic. I like to say the poison is in the dose, but if you're wearing something against your skin and you're keeping your clothes in your bedroom, that is something you're breathing in, and that is unfortunate. So 2 ways that I am working on combating this, other than what I'd been doing, which is every time I see a moth, kill it with a vengeance. But 2 things. One is permethrin, and I have read several studies that talk about the the dangers of permethrin to humans. And it sounds like really it's dangerous when wet. It's dangerous to humans and pets. So I took where I store my knits, which is actually a shoe rack that I use for knit storage instead of shoes. And I took it outside, wore a mask, sprayed the whole thing down, all of the shelves, both of the little drawers, sprayed it. And then I also sprayed the carpet where I keep my knits. I also sprayed the drawer that I keep my sock knits in, because I did have to throw a couple of those away. Less than I had thought, but definitely a couple of my socks away. I sprayed that drawer, and then I did actually spray my knits. I don't typically wear like my sweaters and whatnot straight on my skin anyway, but what I did was I sprayed everything in an afternoon. I left the drawers and everything outside in the garage until they were dry, and then I had sprayed the carpet and the knits early in the day and didn't touch any of them for 2 days, and then they were dry. And then when I went to buy the yarn for my backlit tee, I was talking to the owner of my local yarn shop, and my local yarn shop is a 15-minute drive from here, 10-15 minutes. And I was like, wait a minute, we live in the same climate, we have the same pests. How do you not get pests in your yarn? Like, you have, as a yarn shop owner, you have to make sure that nothing eats the yarn that you're selling. And that didn't even occur to me. And she told me about moth traps. I don't know why I didn't think of them. She was so funny. She was like, have you seen any of our moth traps? And I was like, no. And she was like, they're literally everywhere in the store. And I was blown away. Like, I don't know why that didn't occur to me. And so, yep, just bought a big pack of these. I obviously haven't opened them yet, but I am going to just put them everywhere. So I guess these have pheromones on them. So it's not just like I can't remember what it's called, but you know, I have one of those bug attractor things in my kitchen that tends to more get fruit flies than anything, but I don't think it has pheromones on it. I think it's just sticky and has a light. That's the other thing about it. But these have pheromones, so that's what I'm hoping for. Oh, and how permethrin, the mechanism of permethrin is that upon contact, it kills moths. So that's even though it's dry. And I'm just trying to double up because I am tired of moths. And what is so infuriating is I actually haven't seen a live moth like flying around my house in many, many months. But when I was going through my knits, I found 2 live moths just sort of living in them. Like, one was in my one drawer and one of them was in Steve's sock drawer. And that made me furious. Let's see if these methods work in helping save and preserve my knits. But if you have any suggestions, or if you are experiencing what I'm experiencing, let me know. Also, let me know if you have repaired your damaged knits, whether that's pests or otherwise damaged. Have you given them away to someone to deal with? Have you practiced any skills on otherwise trashed knits? Yeah, let me know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me while I talked through all of the things that I've been doing. I feel so accomplished having gone through and actually pared my knits down, truly saw which ones needed to be repaired and fixed, which ones were completely unsalvageable, and which ones were possibly salvageable by someone else. I do think it is good to, of course, always go through your knits periodically, whether that is to look for damage or if it still sparks joy or whatever, but I just feel so good about what remains of my knits, and I'm excited to intentionally keep wearing my wardrobe and make pieces for my wardrobe that I will actually wear and use. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one.